Thank you to all of our attendees for joining us on, well, in New York, it's becoming a little bit of a stormy Thursday, but for this session, Design 101, Thinking for Digital, we will be covering a few core design fundamentals that will help you create beautifully and intentionally designed experiences, and you don't have to be a designer to do it. Also, one note about this webinar, we will be recording the sessions and sharing this post-webinar, so don't fret if you want to revisit any portion of this. We will be sending this out. Cool. So my name is Renee. I am an interactive art director here on the professional services team, and I have been with Ceros for about a year and a half now.
And I'm Erica. I'm also an interactive art director here at Ceros, and I've been here for about 2 years. And without further ado, we'll get started. In today's webinar, we're going to take you through, as Renee mentioned, all the foundational elements that you'll need to create beautifully designed experiences. So we're going to start by laying that foundation with the studio layout and the grid structure. And then we're going to dive into colors and selecting a color palette that reflects your brand. And then we'll dive into fonts and text, and we'll talk a little bit about setting up a text hierarchy. And then, of course, we'll go into graphics and choosing different graphic elements that really tell your brand story and get that message across. And then keep all of these things in mind, because at the very end, we're going to take everything that you've learned and put it into practice with a fun little game. And of course, there will be time for some questions. So please, if you have any questions throughout this presentation, go ahead and type it in the Q&A box, which you can find in the panel on Zoom. I'm going to hand it back to Renee.
Awesome. So let's crack into our first section, which is all about the Canvas layout and structure. So Canvas layout is a grid system that we set up at the outset of a project to ensure consistent and evenly spaced design. It's also the term that we use for what's traditionally known as a grid system. So these are two terms that I'm going to be using interchangeably. A rule of thumb would be when you hear grid system or Canvas layout, same thing. We also recommend that you set this up at the beginning of your project. And a good way to think about this is like laying the foundation of a house. You want to make sure that you have the framing and the foundation laid before you jump to flooring, light fixtures, color, what have you. And yeah, so with that, let's take a look at how we set up a grid system Canvas layout in Ceros Studio. Play a little video here. And so this is your typical studio view. And where you're going to want to mouse up to access the layout is the view panel up there in the top right. And you can drop that down, go ahead and tick show canvas layout. And then again, canvas layout settings, in which you'll be able to make adjustments to how the layout looks. For this demonstration, I'm just going to focus on the columns and the adjustments that you can make within. So one thing you can start with is the number of columns. We default with 8, and we recommend not going above 12. Anywhere between there is good. You can also change the color of these columns as well as the opacity. You can change the width and the gutter, which is that white space in between. And once you're happy with how it's set up, you can go ahead and hit the apply to all pages so that the grid is present throughout your entire experience. Hit OK, and anytime you create a new page within your studio, it'll appear. Cool. So now that we have an understanding of what the grid/canvas layout is, let's take a look at two experiences. One that was designed with the grid and one without. And first, we can start with the good. So in this example, you'll see that the canvas layout is playing a pretty fundamental role in ensuring clean alignment, proportional design, and everything's really evenly spaced. And it's also doing a great job of pulling the user's eye downward by having those center elements, such as that red arrow, the 2020 agenda, and the tab system that sits under. It's really making it easy not only to read everything that's on and take in the messages, but also you're able to take your next best action from there. So you can see the power of the grid in this experience. Sorry for any background noises. I think we've got some building construction they didn't tell me about.
Just New York things.
Yeah, typical. All right, so here's an example of an experience designed without the grid. You can see that there really isn't any rhyme or reason to where the assets are placed. There's no clear next step that I know what to take. The navigation's all over the place, and it just overall just makes for a bit of a headache of an experience. And you can see why we do advocate creating the grid at the outset of your projects. Awesome. And with that, I'm going to throw it back to Erica for our next section.
Thank you, Renee. And so now that we have that foundation down, it's time to talk about your color palette. And maybe you're working with a robust, super comprehensive set of brand guidelines, or maybe you don't have any colors to start with. Either way, we're going to talk you through how to select colors that will make your experience even stronger and even better. So first off, when it comes to your color palette, you want to kind of think about what tone you want your brand or your experience to evoke. So something that we like to do at Ceros is think about a brand and a company and then pick out a couple words that describe that brand. So on the left and on the right, we have two completely different brands. On the left, we have Grubhub, their food delivery service. I use their app way too often instead of cooking, but we like to describe them as playful and energetic. And you can really see that shine through in all of their colors. You have the red and the yellow, which are used a lot in sort of food imagery, and they make you kind of hungry. And then you have the green, the blue, and the purple, which are also bright and fun colors. And you can see those used throughout the interactive elements like the CTA buttons, and even sparingly throughout some of their illustrations. So overall, these colors contribute to that idea that they're playful and energetic as a brand. And then you have McKinsey and Company on the right, and they are a global management firm. And we like to describe them as professional and inspiring. And you really see that with their main two colors, the navy and the white, which are very clean and contrast each other really nicely. And then you have some bright blues as well as the black to kind of balance it out and be used sparingly, as you can see in that little screenshot of their website. And all these colors just feel really cohesive, and they really contribute to that idea that McKinsey is professional and inspiring. So another thing to keep in mind, especially if you're starting from scratch with a color palette, is that you want to aim for 2 to 3 main colors and about 3 accent colors. So we have Burger King's new branding here. Similar to Grubhub, they have the red and the orange as primary colors, which really like satiates you, makes you hungry. And then they have the white cream color, which feels nostalgic, which is really in line with their new branding. And of course, there's the brown, the yellow, and the green, which are used sparingly throughout. And overall, it just feels very Burger King. And so let's say you want to take your color palette into the studio. We have some tips for you. Maybe you're pulling from a sample image where you really like the colors, or as you see here, maybe you're pulling from a set of brand guidelines. If you use the eyedropper tool, as you're seeing here, and then add the colors to your account colors within Ceros. So we'll see that happen again with the flaming orange. We're selecting that color, adding it to the account colors in the color palette. Whenever you do that, your colors that you've selected actually appear in any new experience that you're created. So it's already in your account. You don't have to worry about adding hex codes or reselecting the same colors. If you do need to add a hex code though, you can easily do that by copying and pasting the hex code in, and then you can go ahead and add that to your account colors as well. Another thing to keep in mind is that you want to keep any sort of interactive elements, maybe that's your CTA buttons or your UI elements, you want to keep those consistent throughout. And so we have this nice example from Newsela. And if you take a look at any of their buttons, they all have the same look and feel. They all have that same blue hover color. And then even the arrows and the X's, those are, if you can see, a very deep navy color, and they feel really similar. And what that does is it tells the user subconsciously that when they see something that looks like this, it subconsciously tells them to take an action, to click a button. And then last but not least, before I hand it back to Renee, I want to leave you with, do not forget about legibility and contrast. I'm saying this because as a designer, we've all forgotten about it in the past, because it's really easy to have favorite colors and to use them in a way that maybe doesn't help your text or your message or your graphics stand out. So I love this bright blue right here, but as you can see, it doesn't stand out against the background. And even if we go to black, well, you can read the headline, but you can't really read the body text. So when you're selecting colors, whether it's for text or graphics, just make sure it contrasts against whatever background color that you have, or background video in this case. Hand it back to Renee for fonts and text.
Awesome. Thank you, Erica. So for this section, we're going to talk about fonts and text because choosing fonts and establishing a text hierarchy is actually simpler than you think. So to start, a little adage we used to hear in design school quite constantly was never sacrifice functionality over beauty. And basically what that translates to is that if you have a visually engaging design, but it's not leading or encouraging your end user to take the next action or the action you want them to take, then the beauty part is kind of working against the functionality. And an in the wild or real world example analogy we would compare to this is the idea of high heels or stilettos, which of course are very beautiful and stylish and aspirational, but highly impractical to walk in. So that's what we always like to kind of compare it to. So for your text hierarchy, the point of a text hierarchy is creating one is to help visually communicate and organize your content. In this example on the right side here, you can see that we have a very simple hierarchy set up where we're actually only using 2 font faces. So the top font or the headline H1 is using Zoom Pro Bold in the weight bold and also the largest size. And the rest of those designations are using one font face called Montserrat. But within those, you can see that there is a variation in weights and text size is also being used. We also recommend limiting the variations, the number of font faces that you use in your experiences. We're actually going to get into a few examples later, but before we do, one pro tip from us is that when you have set your hierarchy and you're happy with the color, the weight, the size, and any animations you've applied, you can go ahead and copy those text boxes and copy and paste so that you can cut down on production time when you're building out the rest of your design. Cool. So now that we have an idea of what a text hierarchy is and why it's important, I want to go through a few examples of these principles in place. So the example you see here on your right, we're only using 2 fonts, and the top font is a nice, bold, flourished, traditional slab that is really only being used in a very, very small designation. In this instance, it's only being used as the headline, whereas the other fonts, font 2, it's very clean, modern, easy to read, and it's working in a few different instances on this example. You've got it in the body copy, the Learn More CTA, and then also in the nav at the top there. And conversely, an example of too many font faces in which we've got 6 here in play, and it's really difficult to discern what message to take away. The eye really doesn't know where to land first, and it just overall makes for a very poor reader experience. So definitely recommend limiting the number of font faces that you use in an experience. And finally, just as Erica had touched on in her section on color, a very apropos example, font legibility should always be top of mind, meaning that the fonts that you select and the colors that you use are very important to the readability. And as much as we love the Space Jam circa 1996 example, in hindsight, probably make some other font choices because the dark red against the black with the very busy star pattern, it's pretty hard to take in what they're trying to say here. So hopefully the 2021 site is much better. Cool, so I'll give it back to Erica to cover our next section.
I think Space Jam's creative team saw your presentation and took your advice, Renee, because if you look, the new site, it incorporates text hierarchy and legibility, which is awesome. But anyways, on to graphics. There's a whole world of graphics. Graphics are videos, photos, illustrations, icons, so many. And you can use all of these different elements to really elevate the story or the message that you're telling. However, it's important to keep these graphics cohesive throughout, and we're going to tell you just how to do that. So as I mentioned, you want to choose graphics that are consistent with your brand and your message. So we have two different sets of graphics here. Both have to do with meal and food delivery services. On the left, we have Shipt. Shipt is a meal or a grocery delivery service, and they're really grounded on the idea that you can get exactly what you want without leaving the house. And you see that shine through in all of their graphics, from their logo to their illustrations, which have that sort of whimsical, warm, inviting feel. And then, of course, their imagery. You have the man, he just got his groceries delivered. He's really happy and excited. And even the purple overlay over the image just feels really cohesive with the logo and the other illustrations. So all of these are working to contribute towards that message that you can get exactly what you want without leaving the house. Now on the right, we have another set of graphics that, as I mentioned, also have to do with grocery delivery service, but they feel totally different and maybe not as cohesive as Ships do. So you have the photo of the woman, she's on the phone, she's kind of upset. She's like, where are my groceries? And of course, you never want to include graphics that stress people out unless that's the intention of your message. But in addition to that, we have the fast delivery badge and the woman pushing the grocery cart. And those graphics feel kind of 3D, whereas the other ones, like the man on the motorcycle or the hand holding the box, feel a little flatter in terms of their style. And also the colors just don't match up. So even though all of these graphics on the right have to do with the message and the idea around grocery delivery, they just don't feel cohesive and they don't tell that story in the same way that Ships do. And then we also wanted to mention that you can utilize icons to help tell your story, but similar to what I mentioned on the last slide, you want to keep the icon style cohesive throughout. And icons are honestly a really great way to take a ton of information and synthesize it into one short graphic that reiterates your point. So here we have icons that have to do with healthcare. And on the left, you have a set of icons that feel like a family. And what I mean by that is if you take a look at the line weight, they all have the same thickness. And then there's other stylistic elements like maybe the sharp corners. So you have the briefcase that has on the top middle row, and it has the sharp corners, which is very similar to the computer screen that you have on the bottom left, which also has the same sharp corners. So even though these icons are all representing different things, they still feel really cohesive, like an icon family. And on the right, you also have icons that have to do with healthcare, but they feel very different. Some are filled in, the line thickness on others are just totally different. You have the cute little stethoscope with the whimsical elements at the bottom, which is nice, but none of the other icons have those whimsical elements. And then of course you have the doctor cartoon, which feels like he belongs in a comic book versus in this little icon family. And then last but not least, before we dive into the game portion of this, we want to leave you by letting you know that you can easily adjust graphics within the studio. You don't have to rely on your creative team or Photoshop. You can actually just do it right here in Ceros, and we're going to show you how. So let's say you have an image that you really like. Maybe it's from Getty or a stock site, or maybe your marketing team sent it over. You can actually bring it into the studio and adjust different elements. So as you can see here, we're adjusting the width and the height. You can even crop the image similar to as you would do in any other program. You just double click it and then size it to your liking. And let's say the image maybe isn't contrasting against the text, or it just doesn't feel as cohesive with the rest of the piece. You can actually go into the image editing panel and change the blending modes to adjust the darkness and the opacity. You can change the brightness and the saturation and even the hue to adjust the color. So have fun, play around with this, and don't feel like you need to rely on your creative team or on Photoshop or a crazy design program, because it's right here and it's easily accessible for you. And now, without further ado, we're going to take everything that we learned. So starting with that foundation, the canvas layout and the grid system that Renee went over, to diving into colors, to what you learned about fonts and text hierarchy, and then of course with graphics. Think about everything that you just learned, and then take a look at this example of this fun little marketing newsletter. There's some things that could probably be improved in terms of design. So we're going to give you all 3 minutes, and we're going to let you type into the chat any ideas as to how you might make this design a little bit better and maybe a little bit more cohesive. So go ahead and feel free to write it in the chat. And again, the Q&A chat is a little bit different than the regular chat. So you can ask your questions in the Q&A chat on Zoom, and then you can use the actual chat to write some ideas for how you would improve this design. 3 minutes is on the clock. Use less fonts. So, yep, needs consistent fonts. Yeah.
Contrast, great call.
Grid.
Coming in fast,
Ooh.
but these are really good points. I love the ADA call out too.
Yep. Consistent icons, consistent fonts, header legibility.
Align
Icons need
text,
work.
absolutely.
Yeah, this is great. Better alignment, lower size. Yep. Yep, the read button is popping, but not in a good way. Love that, Erin. Change the arrows. So we'll give you guys like a little less than a minute. Yellow font is hard to read.
Very unreadable.
Too much graphics from the phone. Yeah, it's a little chaotic over here. Photo may not match the content. It's a good catch. Very busy. Yeah. What are they trying to convey? I don't know. It's
Good
hard to tell.
question.
Okay, awesome. Well, these are all great answers, alignment, grid, and so on. So we're going to show you what it might look like. We magically just designed this based on everything you wrote in. And as you can see, the text is now aligned right here. We sized down the header a little bit just to give some breathing room. And in terms of alignment, there's also a grid system that we worked with. So as you can see, this icon aligns. It flushes nicely with the image as well as the text right here. What else am I missing?
Icons are all fully consistent and really nicely aligned up top. It feels like also moving the arrows down and aligning to the learn more, like flushing and meeting those alignment lines is creating just like a really nice sense of space. And I feel like it gives the user a much clearer next step by, utilizing some of these spacing and alignment tricks.
Yeah, and even the CTA, somebody had mentioned that the colors aren't contrasting, so you can't even read it. Awesome. And then also we use 2 fonts here, a nice ornate one, and then Montserrat, which you saw from earlier, and that's used with maybe a couple different thicknesses, but it just feels more cohesive. And even the image, it tells more of the story about creativity and marketing. And also you can read the text over the image, whereas in this situation, the legibility wasn't there. So those were all wonderful answers.
That's great. Awesome. So thank you to everyone for your insights, and it was really exciting to see how you were able to make those call outs based on what we had reviewed. And so in these at the last portion of our webinar, we'd love to open the floor to any questions or clarifications about any of the content that we reviewed or any design principles just in general when working in studio. Again, feel free to submit through the Q&A panel and we can kind of moderate through there.
So we have one question about fonts, or a couple of questions about fonts, but one of them, is there a way to set fonts for the project so it can be applied automatically? So once you add a font into any experience on within your admin folder, you'll be able to access that font through any new experience. But I also want to call out what Renee mentioned earlier about copying and pasting fonts or text boxes. Let's say you create a text box and it's for your header, you set the boldness, you set the color. If you want to use that same exact style, you can just copy and paste the text box and it will copy over all of those attributes.
I see another one too from Maria. Also, sometimes I replace an image to another one from my computer using the icon the image it replaces in a lower size. Okay, so it seems like this question is regarding when you're bringing an image or replacing an image within the studio. When you replace the image, it resizes. I want to say that we're actually working on a feature to replace one-to-one, meaning that when you do go to replace an image, if it's sized to match the original image size, then you won't have that issue where it makes the image smaller and kind of like forces you to just redo it from the ground up. So hopefully.
And then Kelsey's writing in, we have pretty strict brand guidelines. How can we bring these guidelines into Ceros? That is an awesome question. And that's something that we work with every day. We actually have a template on the Ceros site that we'd be more than happy to send out after. And you can use that template to incorporate your brand guidelines. It has section for colors, fonts, and so on. So you can make sure that everybody has access to those brand guidelines within Ceros, and then you can easily copy and paste elements. So maybe within your brand guidelines, you set up the text hierarchy and the headline and subhead structure. You'll have that in the template that we have, and you can easily copy and paste that into new experiences.
Nice. Yeah, I'll take the last one here too from Anders. Can the grid be square or just columns? So within the grid, you can set up rows in addition to columns. In the interest of time and not wanting to overload, I only focused on columns because that's typically kind of where we sit. But you do have the ability to change around different grid settings. And I believe there are some some educate articles regarding grid system as well that can try and pull up and share with you. Welcome.
And then Maria had asked when we're planning to render Asian typography for countries like China and Japan. So you can do that for certain fonts like Arial, and very basic ones do support it, but I do know we're working on something. So stay tuned and we'll have more info for you. Let's see, a good question. So we have another question from Maria. Is there a way to put components and branding colors easily and fast? Sorry, I can't, I'm blanking. Is there a way to put components and branding colors in easily and create things fast for the marketing team? Again, I would utilize the template that Caroline just dropped in the chat, and also just copy and paste what you have. So sometimes what we do on our professional services team is if we create a whole landing page and we want to easily replicate it or scale it, we'll take pieces of it out and copy it into new Ceros experiences. So if you like a header that you designed in the past, you can just copy and paste that into a new Ceros experience, swap the headline text, maybe swap the image. You can right click and just click replace image or replace video, and there you'll have a new header without having to start from scratch. So definitely replicate anything you've created. Okay.
All right.
That covers it.
Right. Cool. Yeah, well, I mean, if there's no other questions, and again, like we will definitely be sharing this recording as well as this deck post webinar. So definitely look out for that, because that'll definitely be landing with you should you want to go back and watch anything again. And if I spoke too quick, which I sometimes feel like I rush through things, we'll definitely provide this recording so you can go back and rewatch it.
Yeah. Well, thank you all so much, and enjoy the rest of your day and have fun designing beautiful experiences.